if your boss were to say, "Hey, do you mind if I cut your wage in half? I need you to work just as hard," though, a lot of folks would balk at that. On the other hand, if your boss said, "Hey, I'm going to pay you twice as much," you'd probably be like, "Oh man, I'll work, I'll work longer hours."
My name is Mike Mauceli, and this is the Energy Show with REI Energy, where we're energizing your investments and maximizing your tax deductions. Today, we're going to be talking about gas prices, and you're going to discover how Trump's policies will impact gas and energy prices. My guest today is Patrick De Haan. Patrick, a seasoned petroleum analyst with over 15 years at Gas Buddy, brings a wealth of experience in analyzing and tracking oil markets and fuel prices for nearly two decades. Good to have you on the show today, Patrick. Well, Patrick, it's great to have you back on the show again.
Great to be with you again.
I thought it was a good time to bring you back, obviously, and have you talk a little bit about prices. I mean, obviously, with the Trump coming into office, and there's been a whirlwind of stuff happening in the last 72 to 72 hours, and it seems like that he's really going to push to try to drive gas prices. I think I saw an interview yesterday where he's recommending that gas prices should be around $1.70 per gallon, and just kind of wanted to get your thoughts because I know you're involved in a lot of these markets.
Yeah, it's been a whirlwind since President Trump took the oath of office, was inaugurated, and we have all these potential changes very suddenly. So it's a lot to digest. Now we've known for a couple of weeks, some of his policies, as you mentioned, his desire, drill baby drill, and we're going to bring those gas prices, cut them in half. I think he mentioned that on energy prices. So, there's a lot to unpack here with, the energy emergency he declared, folks believing that prices will be cut in half and tariffs. I mean, there's just, and now the potential retaliation in tariffs from Canada. Trump already delayed the implementation of those tariffs. Initially, he said that was going to be one of the first executive orders he issued, but then he punted down to February 1st. So, trying to get in the head of the president is really difficult to see how he's going to move things, but there's potential huge impacts to what people are paying at the pump.
So, from a producer standpoint, which that's my end of the business, I mean, we drill, a lot of horizontal wells, and of course, we know what we sell at the wellhead, what we get at the wellhead, and in most cases, the areas that we're in, there's either $1.50 or $2 differential from getting the product out of the fields and into the refineries. I mean, is it, because when I look at the oil that we produce here in the United States, especially from the shale plays,
Yeah.
these wells are costing somewhere between $9 to $15 million a piece to drill. And in a lot of cases, you're paying anywhere from $3,000 to up as high as $30,000 an acre just to lease some of these properties. So I don't know how much lower oil prices can physically go, from the producer standpoint. So is there room in the refining side to get to this magical number that he's trying to achieve?
As a producer, you don't like to hear prices are going to be lower
Right.
because generally, if your boss were to say, "Hey, do you mind if I cut your wage in half? I need you to work just as hard," though, a lot of folks would balk at that. On the other hand, if your boss said, "Hey, I'm going to pay you twice as much," you'd probably be like, "Oh man, I'll work, I'll work longer hours." And that's kind of the equation here that the president is asking for or wanting. He thinks that, oil prices cut in half, they're going to produce more, when that's exactly the opposite. Normally, as a producer, when you have fixed costs, um, and say your break even is $50 to $70 a barrel, there's not much incentive there if the president is going to sign policy and push you one way. A lot of oil producers like ExxonMobil, have been pushing back on this, economics. Now, it's interesting because President Trump has a degree from Fordham in economics, but what he's trying to do here is not really feasible for oil companies to be profitable at a place that would get us down to gas prices below $2 a gallon. Now, the other wild card here that Trump does not have control over in this is calculus is gasoline taxes. That's a statewide issue. The federal gas tax, that is a federal issue, but that's a congressional approval needed to adjust that. And that's why it hasn't been adjusted since the 90s, right? It's hard to get one party on board or both parties on board for a tax adjustment. So, a lot of states have increased their gasoline taxes in the last 10 or 20 years. Places like New Jersey that used to be relatively cheap now are not. Pennsylvania, everyone's gas taxes have gone up. The only thing sure in life is death and taxes, right? The saying is, and the only thing aside from taxes is rising taxes. How many times can you see gasoline taxes go down? It's almost impossible. So, having said that, it would take, Goliath to be able to move gas prices below the $2 a gallon mark. You'd need a lot of things. You'd need oil companies that are far more efficient, that can bring that oil to the surface far more efficiently. You'd need states to lower their gas taxes. I mean, look, even during a pandemic, we only saw sub $2 prices for like a month. And look how much it took to get us there. The national average fell to $1.76. And for President Trump to think that that could happen feasibly during times of solid economic growth, it's virtually impossible.
Well, that's, kind of the way I see it from the producer standpoint is that, I mean, unless AI is the ultimate answer and that, it's going to show us a much cheaper way or inexpensive way to produce a barrel of oil, which, there's only so many shale plays. And when you look at the
Right.
barrels now, when you look at the barrels that have been put on the market in the last couple of years, it's primarily come from the American producer, right? I mean, not much of it has come from OPEC and Saudi
Right.
Arabia and stuff. So they really, I guess could step up the pace and try to increase their production rates. I don't know how much they can physically do that, but I mean, I know here in the U.S., I mean, we have been drill baby drill in the last
Yeah.
several years, regardless of whether Biden was trying to put us out of
Yeah.
business or not. I mean, I understand from the government land standpoint of it, but I'm not so sure how much, prices can go down, like you say.
I mean, to your point, I mean, see, and that's the thing about a president. I mean, Biden tried to get in the way and he couldn't, and in terms of U.S. oil production, oil producers are going to do what they're going to do. That's the beauty of America is you can try to derail things and folks on that side of the aisle fully believed that the oil industry was under attack. Now, it was under pressure, right? Biden certainly restricted things, made it more difficult until Russia's invasion of Ukraine. I think that really opened up the White House to see things differently, right? Because then you had oil shooting up to $130 a barrel. You had Americans that were really angry at $5 gasoline, and Biden never fully recovered. But you have to look at how that caused a paradigm shift in the Biden administration looking at oil, right? After Russia's invasion and gas shot up, then the president's thinking, oh man, what are we going to do? Everyone's yelling at us. And then he started easing things, easing sanctions on Iran, right? Iran started shipping oil more easily, right? They were still sanctioned, but the president kind of backed off on enforcing those sanctions. Same thing with Venezuela, right? We started becoming a little bit more friendly, certainly not, fully diplomatically friendly, but you have to look at that. So even Biden trying to get in the way, I think they backed off of that. And that's what allowed gas prices to normalize. There were a lot of shockwaves over the last 4 years, and I think a lot of Americans probably wrongly assign all of the blame on the guy in the White House that they despised, right? And they're, same thing is happening on the other side of the aisle now. But at the end of the day, economics are the driving force here. And a president, whether Democrat or Republican, they don't have much control over global economics. And you talk about OPEC. OPEC still has ample spare capacity. And now, of course, within days of Trump taking over the Oval Office again, we're seeing pictures of Mohammed bin Salman, the Saudi prince, now restoring a relationship with the Trump administration. So you have to wonder if Saudi Arabia has ample spare capacity, probably 3 million barrels a day that could quickly come back online. The thing about that is if the president gets OPEC to open the spigots, he's also going to basically, kind of shoot U.S. oil producers in the foot because U.S. oil producers probably have a higher cost. There's a lot more easy oil, I would say, in Saudi Arabia than there is in the United States, right? We've tapped a lot of the easiest wells. You as a driller, I mean, and that was hilarious about the AI. If AI could become a geologist, just imagine the floodgates could open. But, the inherent difference, to your point, is the U.S. oil industry is not state owned. They
Yeah.
don't take direction from a president. Whereas, companies like Saudi Aramco and Saudi Arabia, that's under the direction of the government. So that's the inherent difference here is in the United States, oil producers respond to economics, not presidential direction. And that's why it's going to be hard to see this, $1.70 gasoline fulfilled.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that prices are pretty stable right now. I mean, I think that's where kind of the sweet spot is. I mean, back when a lot of these horizontal plays took off, well, you had a lot of financial institutions just throwing money at it.
Oh
And
yeah.
of course, what they found out that in the end, they ended up losing a lot of money because they were just drilling everywhere that you could drill a horizontal shell, and a lot of them are non-commercial,
Yeah.
even at $100 a barrel. So, when you look at a play like the Bakken up in North Dakota, for example, I mean, it really comes down to about three counties that are the most profitable counties.
Yep.
And even though you had wells, 14,000 wells drilled. So I think, the financial companies and the oil companies have become a lot smarter today. And they're really in it to make a profit. They're not in it to lose money and just
Yep.
drill, anything that they can get a barrel of oil out of.
They're to your point, they're 100% more diligent. I
Yeah.
mean, the gold days were when everyone was, drilling wells, there's oil springing up. And now you have a much more disciplined US oil sector because of what happened during COVID, right? COVID forced them to become efficient. COVID forced some oil producers out of the business. I mean, who can be profitable at 10 or $20 a barrel, right? I mean, and here's one, none of the drop in US oil production was President Trump's fault at the time, right? Important to clear that up too. Again, economics.
Right.
If oil is $20 a barrel, why sell? Why drill? And so, we've kind of made the recovery now from the pandemic. Oil producers have become far more efficient, so they probably can raise that barrel of oil to the surface a little bit more efficiently, whether it's $5 or $8 a barrel cheaper. There's been a lot of efficiencies, but getting back to the pump, it's not really realistic. Given the inflation in wages, gas stations overhead has gone up. I mean, think of operating a business. The minimum wage now in many states is $15 to $18 an hour. It's kind of like I hearken back to the days when you used to be able to go in a grocery store and buy a 2 liter of Coca-Cola for 70 cents. I love the idea of going back to those days when I can buy 2 liters for 70 cents, but I also don't want to go back to those days when I was making $3 or $4 an hour, So the one thing is that we're always going to have higher prices. A decade from now, I guarantee you we're going to be like, man, those $2 or $3 gas days, that was great. Because in a decade, it's probably going to be $4 or $5. And that's the other difficulty here is inflation is the only thing steady. You don't want deflation. Look at what happened during the Depression. That was not a great time. So, the only thing moving down the road here is the president's got some good policy. He's going to ease some restrictions on oil companies. That's going to help in the long run, but it's not going to help in overnight. You
Well,
know,
I'm excited. I mean, I talk to a lot of people around the country. I'm sure you do too. And, there's just a mood of excitement going on now. And so it's great. But, when I did want to ask you a question about California,
Hmm.
uh, because obviously they've got some really, you know, uh, tough laws for oil and gas. And I didn't know how this national energy emergency was going to be able to affect,
Yeah.
them actually, because California used to be one of our number one producing states in the
Yeah.
in the United States, and there's a lot of oil and gas left there to be produced. But I mean, how does that affect, working with those types of states?
Well, I mean, to your point, California is the one example of tremendous amounts of bureaucracy that prevent. I mean, look at gas prices in California. They're over $4.
Yeah.
National average fell below $3. There's a huge disconnect there. And at the gist of it, it's your point. I mean, it's taken a long time, but it's materialized to a point now where California is very anti-oil. They're very pro-environment. And I'm not commenting on those stances being right or wrong, but they cost motorists money. And to your point, now, there's amount of wells in California that have basically been grandfathered in, but you won't see a new well in California because of the layers of bureaucracy, the permitting, the environmental regulation. The break even might be $50 in the Gulf Coast. And in California, if they were to drill a new well, the break even might be $80 or $100 a barrel, if you can even drill the well. So, and that adds up. Not only are you not going to find any new wells in California, but you're not going to build new refineries. You're probably not going to build new infrastructure because they attack and they demonize. In California, there's no personal responsibility. Everyone blames the oil companies, even as is it the oil company's fault that I'm filling my tank up once a week? They're just building a product. So California is an extreme example of what can go wrong with so much regulation. They've regulated the oil industry, and they've basically closed off the state in terms of competition. When there's a refinery issue in California, prices skyrocket $1 a gallon because they've closed the state off to investment. Refineries are, having it's survival of the fittest. There's only 9 refineries in California. There used to be over 20. If you look at the amount of refineries that have shut down in California, California has lost, I think, triple the amount of refining capacity that the rest of the nation has over the last several decades. And part of it is because they've made it really difficult for them. So that's a cost consumers are paying every time at the pump. I mean, Newsom and other politicians would like you to think it's somehow greedy oil companies in California, but if you go over to Arizona, it's not greedy oil companies. So, yeah, California is one of those places where there's probably a lot of opportunity, but you're never going to realize it. And President Trump's, it's really interesting because he's talked about rescinding California's waiver to the EPA. For those that don't know, California has its own version of the EPA called the Air Resources Board. And the Air Resources Board, right, can supersede the EPA. So California has long had their one-off laws. Back in the early days of Price is Right, I was, when they give away a car, I'm always like, what the heck is California emissions? Why is California always referred to when they give away a car? Because, cars given away Price is Right films in Los Angeles, and every single car that they gave away had to have a special California emissions package. And that highlights the cost of businesses here. So if the president were to do away with that, it would essentially, California would then fall back to the EPA's standard, which would probably really help motorists there. I can't really comment on what it would do to the Air Resources Board or what would happen, but
even the trucking. I mean, obviously, I think in the next 5 or 10 years, you're not even going to be able to drive a diesel truck in California, right? You're going to have to stop at the border and change out your load and drive a battery powered truck the rest of the way.
I mean, you could be spot on. I mean, the way California is going is it's doing things all on its own, and there's a tremendous cost to businesses and consumers when you decide to, have these arbitrary policies. I mean, there's not a whole lot of science behind what they're doing, right? The air is cleaner in California, but we still have millions of internal combustion engine vehicles. I mean, there's hybrids. Whenever you see government picking winners and losers, it should be, approached very delicately.
Well, it's the same in New York, right? I mean, they won't let you drill a horizontal well in New York, even though you have the Marcellus Shale that comes into the southern part of New York there from Pennsylvania and throughout there. And,
and to your point,
why they have such high prices.
and look how much in New York still uses, home heating oil.
Yeah.
I mean, home heating oil is much worse for the environment than natural gas. And they're talking about banning natural gas stoves. I mean, again, these are the kind of foolhardy missions. Politicians, they don't see how you get from point A to point B. They just see point C, D, or E. They think the country is moving this way, and they just make an arbitrary decision, and it costs you and I.
Yeah. And, the EPA, of course, has always been the strong arm of the government, right? I mean, they're the ones that, step in and give permits or take permits away. And I guess with Lee Zeldin coming in, I hope a lot of that's going to change, at least for the next 4 years, right?
Yeah, it certainly could. And I think I would speak for most Americans. We like the clean air. We like the clean water. I'm a Michigander. There's been a lot of political back and forth about, Lake Michigan. Obviously, Enbridge has a pipeline that runs under the Straits of Mackinac. Um, and the political infighting in Michigan between Canada and Michigan's governor and suing Enbridge, all of that has put this tunnel. They were going to build a tunnel under the Straits of Mackinac for their pipeline. It's been delayed years now. It could have been built by now, but all the fighting. So, and again, there's some common sense approaches. We should have clean air and we should have clean water. So we don't always have to sacrifice, but
Yeah, but
to your
that's the
point, it's
cheapest
going to be
way. That's the cheapest way to move gas, right? Through a pipeline, and it's
the
also the
most
safest
efficient,
way.
safest way. Yeah, exactly. And you ban a pipeline, and then look what happens. You put it on a rail car, and you look at how many
Yeah,
times the DOT standards have changed for rail cars. The design has changed to be safer because inherently rail is a bit more dangerous. How many crude oil trains have we seen accidents? Too many.
right. No, I agree with you. Well, hey, it was great having you on the show today, Patrick. Can you kind of give our listeners how to follow you and, kind of tell us what your thoughts are on gas prices in the future?
Yeah, I'm on social media. Usually my handles are Gas Buddy Guy on X and Instagram. And, I have a Substack where we delve into the weeds. But, looking at what we expect for gas prices, we expect, and so many people like to make this political. But like I said, at the root of our predictions is the economy, doing an economic analysis. Because the White House, as we said, I mean, some of these policy changes take years, but we are expecting that 2025 will be a friendlier year for people at the pump. Not a hugely significant improvement, but back last year, 2024, the yearly national average was 3.33 a gallon. For this year, we're expecting a modest improvement to 3.22 a gallon. And there's a lot of uncertainty. We haven't even talked about the possibility of Trump's tariffs. There's a lot of uncertainty over political policy, but generally speaking, political policy takes a backseat to the economy. So we're hopeful that most states will see a gentler year at the pump, and there could be a lot of wild cards this year. And if you want to read our full 2025 Gas Buddy fuel price outlook, you can go to gasbuddy.com and check out our forecast. We break down gas prices in every state. Unfortunately, California, you're gonna have the crown for the most expensive prices, and you'll be able to see what we expect. And it's going to be a very typical year. Gas prices will be going up in the spring. It has nothing to do with the White House, and gas prices will go down in the fall, and it has nothing to do with an election. It's simply the seasonality. So it was a pleasure joining you. Thanks for having me. But if anyone ever wants to reach out, I'll be around.
Well, I definitely want to have you back in the future, and I certainly appreciate you taking time to come on the show today.
Well, my pleasure. Again, really appreciate the conversation, and we'll be here to analyze what happens in the next couple of years, and we'll keep on our toes.
Thanks, Patrick.
This podcast is a presentation of Rich Dad Media Network.